Hey guys, it's me, Mr. 250, and welcome back to Banshee's Last Cry. Let's continue on this strange story where Grace seems to be somewhat unaffected by this dead body that we, happen to find that, may or may not have done anything awkward with us. Yeah, but anyway, let's continue. 5 minutes later, Grace came back to my room with Mr. Forrest in tow. He had a dejected look on his face, one I never saw last night. He entered without saying a word and just stood there, looking down at Tiffany's body. I started to speak, but Mr. Forrest put his index finger to his lip. He looked around the room one more time, then suddenly got down on his hands and knees like a dog, and began peeking under the side table. Finally, he reached his hand under the bed. When he stood up, I saw something black stuck to the end of his index finger. It looked like a small cockroach. He proceeded to walk to the window, open it, throw the object out, and quickly close the window again. What was that? I was just about to ask when I thought better of it and shut my mouth. Mr. Forrest still appeared to be looking for something. He found the wine bottle from last night lying on the floor, picked it up and sniffing at it. Then he picked up the fallen wine glass, poured some in, swirled it around, smelled it again, and gave it a tiny lick. Knockout drug? Grace asked, whispering softly. No. Probably some kind of truth serum. Truth serum? Of course, I'd heard the phrase before. In spy movies from the 60s, the bad guys were always injecting people with that stuff during interrogations to pump them for intelligence. But why would anyone try to get me to drink something like that? Keep it down, Max. Who do you think she belonged to, Uncle Bill? Good question. Mr. Forrest took a closer look at the wine label. It's a very expensive Burgundy. A good year, too. No doubt about it. She was SDECE. No one else would be such a stickler for quality. Huh? SD... what? I said. Grace responded to me as if anyone but a fool would know the answer to that question. It's a French counter-espionage agency. French counter-espionage? I was so surprised I forgot to keep my voice down. Shh! Grace and Mr. Forrest put their fingers to their lips at the same time. What about that bug? Grace asked. Standard covert listening device, Japanese make. Same as what every country uses these days. Of course, we don't know if it was put here by Tiffany, or by the person who killed her. I swallowed heavily and whispered, is this some kind of joke? French counter-espionage listening devices? But even as I was asking it, it was clear from the expression on Grace's and Mr. Forrest's face that they weren't kidding with me. Mr. Forrest looked back and forth between me and Grace for a moment, then finally seemed to make up his mind. It looks like there's no choice. I better fill you in on what's going on. Grace didn't look happy, but she shrugged her shoulders resignedly. Well, do what you have to. Come on, Grace. Next thing you're gonna tell me is that you're a spy too. I tried to keep a nervous smile on my face. Spy isn't exactly the right word. Our mission is to monitor other nations' intelligence gathering operations in Canada. Didn't you know? This country is called Spy Heaven because it's so easy to infiltrate the US from here. Spy Heaven? Yeah, you may think that spy activity is something that only happens in the Middle East or something. You think it has nothing to do with you. But you couldn't be more wrong. Part of the problem is that there's no comprehensive system that ties the US and Canada's counter-espionage efforts. So, for international spies, it's a piece of cake to travel back and forth between the two, to organize or evade capture. I see. I thought they tightened up the borders a lot since 9/11, but I suppose it still made sense. They collect proprietary government technical info or personal data, and they sell it abroad, usually to the Chinese. If you include industrial espionage, it's estimated that the total loss of stolen tech goes up to trillions of dollars every year. That's why it's such a serious problem. But I'm like a part-timer. Well, apparently she didn't think so, Mr. Forrest said, looking down on at the mangled corpse of Tiffany Oakley. So, what did she think anyway? Mr. Forrest didn't answer right away. I was just about to ask again when he finally did respond. She thought you were the Banshee, probably. Now, I was even more confused than ever. What was that supposed to mean? Oh, wait, hold on. Banshee? So, who's the Banshee? Grace answered me first. It's not a ghost or anything. It's the codename of a legendary spy from the East. Where? The Eastern Bloc nations from the Cold War era. Behind the Iron Curtain. But that was years ago. The Soviet Union doesn't even exist anymore. That's the problem. Max, she looked over at me exasperated. You see, when the Cold War ended, the Banshee lost whoever his employer was. What would you do if you were a spy and your boss went out of business? I thought for a minute, then answered, no, I actually forgot to... I didn't think about this, but I need to pull up the page again, so hold on. So we either have find a new employer, find a new line of work, or write a tell-all bestseller. And in here we need to choose find a new employer. You got it. The Banshee worked for years as a spy for the Eastern Bloc. Not only does he have plenty of expertise as a spy, he also has inside knowledge on loads of classified information. That probably includes specifics about US military deployments all over the world. Asia, Europe, the Middle East. If that intel were to be sold to, let's say, an enemy nation, it would cause a tremendous amount of damage to security in the West. If possible, we'd like to get the Banshee over on our side. But if we can't manage that, we have to neutralize his threat before he leaks his intel to other target nations. This was getting more and more surreal. My Grace, a normal good-looking college student. Okay, that was weird. That's the first time that's happened. There was a spider crawling on my microphone. It kind of surprised me more than anything. Anyway, my Grace, a normal good-looking college student. I couldn't believe she was talking about this crazy world spy network stuff. Then again, if you had asked me yesterday if I'd be sitting in a room with a woman whose throat had been cut from ear to ear, I would have told you were crazy. I had no choice but to believe what Grace was telling me. But still, I had a lot of questions. So, Tiffany thought I might be this Banshee, right? But why? Why would anyone think there'd be a spy like that out here in a ski resort? Grace glanced briefly at Mr. Forrest. It was his turn to explain next. Oh well, she had that part right anyway. The Banshee's going to show up sometime here tonight. You saw it, didn't you? That note that the girls found. Of course. Tonight, the Banshee comes. Once you knew who it was referred to, it was a pretty straightforward message, actually. We had intercepted underground chatter indicating that the Banshee would be coming to this inn to make contact with an intelligence agent from an unknown country. Fortunately, we had plenty of advance notice, so with the cooperation of the owner of this inn, we were able to lay out our own trap. So, you're not the real owner? Of course not. The real owner's soaking up the sun somewhere in the Caribbean right now, all expenses paid. I suppose the bit about you being Grace's uncle was a lie too. I was finally starting to realize how much I'd been played for a fool. I could feel the beginnings of anger bubbling up. Grace answered, apparently oblivious to the emotion swirling inside me. Pretty much. But it turns out he's actually distantly related, so it's not a complete lie. So, why did you invite me here anyway? I thought she had some feelings for me. Was that just my imagination too? Grace must have felt a bit awkward about answering as Mr. Forrest replied instead. For camouflage, we figured a young couple would attract less attention. Naturally, we have young male agents who could have assumed that role, but we decided that in order to deceive an experienced professional, it would be better to use a person like you who didn't really know anything. So, I was only invited here to provide cover? I didn't know whether to feel sad or angry. Come to think of it, I felt both. You think the other two are agents? I figured Grace was referring to the other two girls with Tiffany. It's probably best if we assume so, yes. Don't you have to call the police, to report a murder? Our first priority is to capture the Banshee. If the police show up, he'll never reveal himself. But the murderer must be this Banshee, right? If the police do a thorough enough investigation, they ought to be able to catch him. No, we can't be sure that the Banshee is the killer at all. In fact, that message in blood might have been left intentionally by the killer. Why would he do something like that? For the same reason as that note, to smoke out the Banshee. Huh? Grace explained. That note was probably written by the girls so they could pass it around and watch everyone's reaction. I sure reacted to it. Like I think you saw, yeah. That's probably why they assumed you were working with me and tried to make contact with you. They wanted to find out what you knew. So that's how it worked. I think I finally understood now. Well, let's get this body hid, Mr. Forrest said as it was casually, as if he was suggesting it was time to take out the trash. Grace nodded. He pulled the sheets off the other bed and laid them down next to the body. Well, don't just stand there. Roll the body onto the sheet. He seemed annoyed at my lack of action. Huh? Me? Of course you. Grace didn't move an inch. Resigning myself to the horrible task, I went up to Tiffany's body and helped Mr. Forrest roll it onto the sheet. I watched as a red stain began to grow and spread out across the formerly brilliant white sheet. Okay, let's bring her to the bathroom. We wrapped the sheet around her. Then, with me grabbing her legs and Mr. Forrest taking her head, we carried her into the bathroom. How are we supposed to hide her anyway? There's blood all over the floor. My voice was trembling. I know that. Mr. Forrest grabbed a towel from the bathroom and started to soak up as much blood off the carpet as he could. Just when I thought he was wasting his time since the blood was already absorbed into the fibers, he grabbed the bottle of red wine and sprinkled it liberally around the area. The strong wine smell went a long way towards covering the scent of blood, and it helped to explain the red color too. This should keep a lid on things for a while. Don't let anyone else hear until morning. Mr. Forrest shot a warning at me with his eyes as he went to leave the room. Oh, wait a minute. You're telling me just to go back to sleep in here? With that thing in my bathroom? I cringed as I looked towards the bathroom door. You don't have any choice. I need you to act like nothing happened. If her friends come looking for her, you just play dumb. Got me? I was going to object that I couldn't possibly sleep in a room with a bloody corpse, but he just wasn't listening anymore. He just turned around and left the room. Holding on to my last shred of hope, I looked at Grace pleadingly. She gave a small apologetic smile. Sorry. It's just for one night, so hang in there. Good night. Without another nod, she coldly left the room. Now it was just me and the bloody lifeless corpse that was once Tiffany. Even though I couldn't see into the bathroom directly, I knew I was going to be sleeping right here where she was killed, with all the blood stains there to remind me. Figuring that I wasn't going to get any more sleep that night, I tried to come up with some way to distract myself, and so... Let's see... I decided to get into bed, close my eyes, count sheep. I decided to read all the magazines in the room from cover to cover. I decided to take out the book I'd brought to read in case I had free time. Let's see. I decided to get into bed, close my eyes, and count sheep. I don't know how he's going to do that, but... Let's see. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep. I imagined an endless flock jumping over a barnyard fence. Occasionally, one of them would transform into a pale, bloody corpse with a huge gash in its throat, so I'd have to force myself to turn it back into a cute, fuzzy lamb. 124 sheep. 125 sheep. 126 sheep. Was she really dead? She's really never going to breathe again? I held back a sudden urge to open the bathroom door and have a look before I started counting sheep again. 893 sheep. 894 sheep. 895 sheep. I can't sleep with the light on, I realized. Then again, I was too scared to turn it off. Occasionally dozing off before waking up with a sudden jerk, I got to 9,215 sheep before I finally gave up and decided to head to the lounge. It was almost 6 in the morning, and there was no sign of the storm outside slowing down. The lights in the downstairs lounge were off, and the place was only faintly illuminated by the anemic early dawn filtering through the snow-streaked windows. Abby emerged from the kitchen and stopped suddenly when she saw me. Oh, you scared me. You're up early, aren't you? Yeah, morning. Good morning. So you couldn't sleep after all, huh? After all, what did she mean by that, I wondered. But then she came in close and whispered next to my ear. Boss told me. I'm sorry you had to get mixed up in all of this. Then she smiled kindly, as if to comfort me. Of course. If he had managed to convince the real owner to let him take his place, obviously Abby and Bobby must be working for him too, I realized. That made me feel a little safer, somehow. Would you like some coffee to help you wake up? There's still a little more time before breakfast. I greatly accepted her offer. She turned on the lights for me, and as I sat in the lounge sipping the hot coffee, I felt some of the tension from the night ease. Between the anxiety and the sleeplessness, I was more exhausted than I had realized. The sounds of breakfast being prepared came drifting in from the kitchen, and at about 6:30, Grace walked in. Good morning. Sleep well? Grace came up to me with a sweet smile, as if nothing at all had happened the previous night. I wanted to scream at her that, of course I hadn't slept well, but stopped when I saw the two young girls entering the room. Yeah, I guess. The girls didn't seem to be paying unusual attention to either me or Grace. Maybe they were just like me, just normal girls here to provide cover for Tiffany. Just after Grace sat down beside me, the girls with the glasses looked at us with a concerned look on her face. Excuse me, but have you seen the girl with the long hair that's staying with us? When I woke up this morning, she was gone. Did she know Tiffany had come to my room? Was she just testing to see my reaction? She seemed like just a normal girl. Could it all be an act? I didn't know the answer, so I did my best to keep up my side of the performance. And, no, I haven't seen her lying through my teeth. I looked questioningly over at Grace. She shook her head as well. The girl appeared satisfied by our answers, and, shaking her head resignedly, went to the table where breakfast was already waiting. After sitting down myself, I saw her talking briefly with Abby, but they were speaking too softly for me to hear. I looked at Grace, shooting a question at her with my eyes. Was that okay? She replied with an almost imperceptible nod. The next to show up were the Buchanans. I wondered if maybe one of them was actually the Banshee. They were followed shortly by the impressively large Fauberge. He was wearing the same clothes as the previous evening. If I had to guess, I would have said that he looked more like a potential Banshee than either of the Buchanans. Morning, everybody! A broad smile stretched across Fauberge's bearded face as he greeted everyone in his big, powerful voice. He certainly was friendly, but that too could just be an act. The three of them sat down on a sofa and waited to be called in for breakfast. Breakfast is ready, Colleen called out just as the cuckoo clock chimed. Wow, I thought. She might not even be Mr. Forrest's real wife. Grace and I sat down at the same table as the night before. Although he was a little late, the man named Mr. Jones eventually came down too. Like before, he was hiding his eyes behind sunglasses. Now that's one thing, you may have been, noticing that this is obviously not the same story, like I've said before. But it's interesting now that in this story variation that, with all the spies and counter-espionage crap, that in fact both Mr. Fauberge and Mr. Jones are in fact two separate entities. Let's see. Like before he was hiding his eyes behind his sunglasses, there was no doubt that he was the most suspicious out of all the guests. But then again, that airheaded girl from LA turned out to be a spy, so I suppose a real spy would be a lot less obvious about it. Don't stare at him too much. Grace spoke at me almost without moving her mouth at all. I guess she didn't want him to think that we were talking about him. I obediently turned my attention to the nice breakfast in front of me. It consisted of freshly baked buns and French bread, crispy thick-cut bacon and scrambled eggs. Very orthodox, but delicious. I didn't know who made it, but I couldn't help but feel that they missed their true calling as a chef. Maybe they chose a spy with a cooking background for this mission or something. Eating a normal breakfast like this, the events of the previous night started to seem like they were just a bad dream. Was it really true that Mr. Forrest wasn't just a normal innkeeper? That Grace, the woman sitting right in front of me, wasn't just a normal college student? My eyes drifted to where the two girls sat, worried looks on their faces. Were they working with Tiffany Oakley as spies? Was it just one of them? Both of them? My mind was running wild with all sorts of questions and doubts. But if I started thinking about it now, it was bound to show on my face. Mr. Jones, the man who came down last, finished eating first. He stood up from the table and hurried off, I assumed to his room. I'm going back to my room. Take your time and enjoy your breakfast, Max. Grace stood up, trying to look casual. What? I was about to ask her what was up, but she winked at me and looked away, a serious expression on her face. Ah, she must be planning on following that Jones guy. She probably wants me to stay down here and keep an eye on all the others. Of all the people left, the most suspicious was Mr. Faberge, who was here all alone. But then again, Mr. Forrest had said that the Banshee had been working in the spy business since back in the Cold War. That meant he must have at least a few years on him. Taking that into consideration, the older Mr. Buchanan seemed like a more likely possibility. But what about Amber? There was certainly nothing strange about the idea of the Banshee having a wife. It could be true love, or it could just be a marriage to provide cover. Then, there were the two remaining girls. If they didn't belong to the French counter-espionage group, then the idea that Tiffany had accidentally brought along someone who turned out to be the Banshee was pretty hard to accept. I could also exclude Bobby and Abby from the suspicion, of course. That left Faberge, Jones, and the two Buchanans as suspects. One of them had to be the guy. I wondered if there was some way I could find out which one it was. For the time being, it looked like Grace had her eye on Mr. Jones. When I saw Faberge get up and leave the dining room, I got up as well. Of course, as an amateur, I didn't have any confidence that I could do much. But on the other hand, this guy could have snuck into my room and planted a listening device and even killed a beautiful woman. To be honest, I was filled with a lot of anger. And I have to admit, some of that anger was directed at Grace as well. It looked like he was headed back to his room. Trying to act natural, I followed after him. Since my room was in the same direction, I didn't think it would look too suspicious. I left some space between us as I trailed casually behind. Then, pretending I was having a hard time finding my key, I watched out of the corner of my eye as he went back to his room. What should I do now? As I was standing in the doorway planning my next move, I was surprised to see Faberge open his door and come out right away. Then, he turned towards me and started to walk. Not knowing what else to do, I pretended to finally figure out how to get my door open and slipped in. Just as I was closing the door, he shoved it open hard and hurled himself at me. With no time to even open my mouth, I was thrown onto my stomach, and both my arms were twisted up behind my back. Don't make a sound. He spoke in a quiet voice that carried enough threat of violence to make me wince. Who are you? And I should be asking you that. And we're gonna leave it off for here for right now. I hope you guys are enjoying it so far, now that it's sort of revealed itself for what it really is. The spy story. And while it isn't obviously nearly as captivating as the original story was, I think it's a nice change of pace. It's fun. Especially considering that we know how all these characters are, and now all of a sudden Grace isn't so sweet and nice anymore. Now she's like, yeah, let's just throw that body in the bathroom. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time for more Banshee's Last Cry. Bye!